Hello and welcome to the Functionally Enlightened podcast with Dr. Sharon Sarita. We interview well-respected medical and functional practitioners, as well as patients who have overcome disabling chronic conditions, such as dysautonomia, and reclaimed their health. These enlightened guests provide helpful tips on managing chronic pain and illnesses, using a combination of traditional and whole-body healing modalities. If you're interested in natural healing and quality of life improvement, you're in the right place. Thank you for listening to today's episode.
Hello, everyone. If you're tired of feeling sluggish and unfocused, this episode is for you. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Michael Breus, also known as the Sleep Doctor. Dr. Breus is a world-renowned authority in sleep and human behavior with a unique background that blends clinical psychology and sleep medicine. So he's a leading voice in the field for a multitude of reasons. The first one I want to bring to mind is that he's one of only 168 psychologists globally to have passed the sleep medicine board without attending medical school. That is amazing. Yeah, and he's recognized by Reader's Digest as California's top sleep specialist, and he's a top 10 influencer in the field. Also, he's regularly featured on the Dr. Oz show. He is a trusted advisor as well for the Dr. Oz show. And he's sought after by major brands. Some of you may know the Aura Ring. We talk about that often on this show. So he's offering his expertise to that company. He's also a best-selling author. He's authored, is it four books now? It's 5. So I'm sure you'll be mentioning some of those with us. But I know that The Power of When is one of them that pops up for me every time. And he is a biohacking guru. So I'm excited about jumping into how he can give us some tips and recommendations, especially for those of us who are struggling with our chronic illnesses. Yeah. So Dr. Breus, again, I appreciate your time and thank you so much for being on our show.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is exciting. I love talking with groups of people that are kind of a little bit different or have unique medical, needs going on, because then we can really get into some of the details and see if we can help some people.
Awesome. Now, I know you're in this health space, and a lot of people always want to know what brought you into this field, and especially what was the focus on sleep biohacking?
Yeah. So to be honest with you, this was never my intention. I mean, I just didn't wake up one day and say, hey, I want to be a sleep doctor. That just wasn't what I was doing. Believe it or not, I wanted to be a sports psychologist. I was looking at programs for that. I was getting my PhD in clinical psychology, and in clinical psychology, you do a residency. And so the residency is where you go and you learn practically all the stuff you've been learning in class, how do you do that with people? And so I was trying to get a sports psychology residency, and I couldn't get the one that I wanted. But the the place where I wanted to go had a sleep option. So I had worked my way through graduate school in the Department of Electrophysiology. So I'm the kind of weirdo that likes to take apart, EKG machines and put them back together and make them work better and stuff like that. It turns out that all of those machines are the same machines they use in the sleep lab. So here was my thought. I'm going to sell myself as a sleep guy, and then I'm going to transfer as soon as I get there. Because if you're not going to let me in your program through the front door, I'm probably going to walk in through the back door, kind of whether you like it or not. So I sold myself as a sleep guy. I get there the first day, raised my hand. Yes, Dr. Breus. I said, I want to transfer. They said, here's the deal. Your funding is coming from the sleep lab, which means you have to be there for 6 months. The other 6 months, you can go do whatever you want, but for the first 6 months, you got to be in the sleep lab. And I said, how tough could this be, right? I mean, it's sleep, for God's sakes. We all do it. I learn a few disorders, do a few behavioral techniques, life should be good. By the 3rd day, I completely fell in love with clinical sleep medicine, and I knew I was never going into sports psychology. And I'll tell you why. I help people that fast. It's unbelievable. When you change someone's sleep, you change their life. It is so throughout every part of their existence. And, as a clinical psychologist, a lot of times it can take weeks, months, even years before you see any treatment gains in your patient population. Every single time I walk into the room, somebody is crying and thanking me for changing their life, which is pretty awesome when you think about it. It's kind of a cool way to have a practice. So I was really attracted to it, and I felt like I was able to be so effective with it that why not go for it? So I come back and I get my first job. And my first job, You'll love this story. My first job, you'll remember when you were in life where if they just offered you $30,000, then you could afford health insurance. Okay, that's where I was in my life, right? My first job. So I go into the interview and I crush it. They offer me 60 grand. They offer me full health benefits. I have medical leave. I have vacation, the whole thing. He said, but there's one catch. You have to take and pass the sleep medicine boards at the end of the first year. I raised my hand. I said, Dr. DeMarini, reminder, I didn't go to medical school, right? I have a PhD in clinical psychology. Yes, I did a 6-month residency in sleep and I know a lot about sleep, but I ain't no MD. He said, here's the deal. It's a rogue board. It's brand new. And they're looking for people to take it. There's 1 year left where non-MDs can take the medical board and still be eligible. He said, here's the deal. You have a 1-year contract. If you fail, you're fired.
Oh.
So I went home and you know what I said to my girlfriend, now wife at the time? 60 grand, right? Like I was like, this is amazing. Like they're giving me all this stuff. And I told her the whole story about how I had to take the medical boards at the end of the year. And she looked at me and she was like, are you gonna do it? And I said, what are you, crazy? Like who takes and passes the medical boards without going to medical school, right? I said, what I'll do is I'll keep the job for a year and I'll start looking like 3 months before the job's gonna be up and then I can find another job. And she said to me the thing that I think is probably one of the most important things I've ever heard in my life. She looked at me and she said, I think you could do it. And that was it. Challenge accepted. There were 14 textbooks. And so I taught myself neuroanatomy, neurochemistry, general anatomy, pediatrics, general medicine. And I took and passed the sleep boards. I'm one of 168 people to ever do it. The reason though that I did it, which turned out to be important, was now I feel like I really understand both sides of insomnia. Right? Because that's really my bread and butter. Like that's where I like to play ball, is I understand the psychology of insomnia, but I also understand the biology because I had to take these boards. And I feel like that's been very influential in helping me write all these books and, you know, be able to be on the Oprah show and be with Dr. Oz and do all those kind of cool, fun things, is this kind of knowledge base that I've been able to amass over 25 years. So that's kind of how I became a sleep doctor. But to be fair, most people don't go that route. Most people go to medical school, they become internal medicine doctors, then they specialize maybe in pulmonary or ENT or cardiology, and then they'll do a fellowship in sleep to accentuate their knowledge base. So there's a lot of different types of sleep docs out there.
Yeah, and I can relate with that story because my background is an environmental engineer and I received my PhD transitioning to functional health and falling in love, especially when you see, like you mentioned, the rapid change and how people can go from, I don't know, in your situation, if you have chronically ill or if you have people that are just severely deprived of quality sleep. So yeah, absolutely. So I guess we can start by talking about chronotyping. I know this was something that I looked at and I actually tested way before my own chronic illness story began. And I believe I was a bear at the time. And then
awesome.
taking the test now, I am more of a dolphin. So
yep, you sure are. Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah,
so,
talk to our audience about what really that is.
What does that mean, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody get ready. So I'm going to explain a few things. It's going to take me about 3 minutes, but I promise you by the time I'm done, it will make total sense. So the idea of a chronotype might not be a word that you have heard before. However, the concept is one I'm very confident that you've heard of. If anybody has ever called you in life an early bird or a night owl, those are chronotypes. And so the way I think about it is the brain, sleep has got two systems in the brain. One is your sleep drive. The other is your sleep rhythm. So sleep drive is a lot like hunger, right? I'm hungry. I eat something and that hunger begins to dissipate. Same holds true with sleep. When a cell eats a piece of glucose, something comes out the back end. One of those things is called adenosine. Adenosine works its way through your system, and as adenosine accumulates in a very specific receptor area in your brain, you get sleepier and sleepier and sleepier. So the drive is a lot like hunger. But that's not all there is. There's a whole side called your rhythm or your circadian rhythm. Now, circadian rhythm is also kind of like hunger, but in a different way. So you ever notice that you're hungry around breakfast time, around lunchtime, and around dinner time? That is your rhythm for hunger, like that, okay? Same holds true with sleep. Most people, at least here in North America, have a tendency to go to bed somewhere between 10 and 11 o'clock at night. That's their rhythm. That's what gets interesting. So I'm not talking about drive. I'm only talking about rhythm. And so when I talk to people, I'm not talking about hunger. I'm talking about lunchtime, if you will. So where you move your lunchtime throughout your day can have a tremendous effect on all sorts of things. So for me, where you move your bedtime can have tremendous effects as well. So what I discovered is that genetically speaking, and by the way, you don't get to pick this. Like people come up to me all the time, they're like, oh, Michael, I'm an early bird. And I'm like, are you sure? They say, yeah, I set an alarm and I wake up every morning at 4:30. I'm like, well, you're not an early bird because early birds don't actually need an alarm. They naturally wake up at like 5 o'clock in the morning. They're super chipper. By the way, I really don't like mornings or morning people. They're just so damn smiley all the time. I'm a night owl, as you can probably tell. And so I like the nocturnal side of things, but let's get back to chronotypes. So an early bird chronotype, I call them a lion. So I decided to change the wording for it because I'm a mammal, not a bird. And I wanted to come up with these categories that I felt people would identify with. So early birds are now called lions. And I mean, who wouldn't want to be the king or queen of the jungle anyway, right? And so lions are my early morning optimists. These are my early risers. These are usually the COO of a company. They're very organized. They like to make a list every day and go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, like very organized in their thinking. That's lions. Bears, these are people who like to go to bed around 10:30, wake up around 7:30. These are the best. I wish I was a bear. I got to tell you, all of life is built on a bear's schedule. Like 9 to 5 works perfect for a bear. And I mean, all of that kind of flows really nicely. The third category is what I call a wolf, also representing the night owls, right? And so wolves are my late night kind of creative people. These are the CEOs of a company. Oftentimes, these are the people with the idea. These are the people that, are super duper creative. Like if you have any creative friends and you talk to them and you say, like, when did you get your inspiration to write that song or paint that painting? It's never 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's always 2 o'clock in the morning, right? And so we know that group of people really finds their joy and is really able to function best at night. Now, to be fair, I haven't said anything that everybody didn't already know, right? I mean, there've been morningness, eveningness questionnaires since the 70s. So these three categories are pretty stable. What I did was I found a different category called dolphins. So what's interesting about dolphins is there's two types. There's one by genetics and there's one by circumstance. So genetics are where I actually went in and I looked at the PER3 area on the human genome. What we saw is you can actually look and see what an early bird looks like, or what I call a lion. They actually have a flip-flopping of the particular DNA blocks in a particular order that makes them that early bird. There's another flip-flopping in the opposite direction that makes people a night owl, and then there are people that are just kind of in the middle and doing their thing. All of this is, again, not new news, but 10% of the entire population has chronic insomnia. 10%. Like, that's 1 in 10 people. That's a tremendous number of people when you start to think about it, right? And so I said, what is it about these characteristics? So I started to study these insomniacs, and here's what I discovered. Number one, genetically, they're different. Their sleep schedule is all wonky and wavy, and sometimes they sleep well, and sometimes they sleep like crap, and there's very little rhyme or reason to it, and that's genetic. But then there's another group of dolphins, and it's dolphins by circumstance. And so that's really where I think you might fall into that category, because before you didn't have a chronic autoimmune situation, right? It's autoimmune, is that correct?
It's inflammatory. It's from a mesh implant illness. So that sparked this whole cascade of inflammatory syndromes.
Right. And so that is the environment. That is the new situation that is now affecting your chronotype. My guess is you actually have that bear chronotype still underneath there somewhere, but all of the complications of the inflammatory disease that has been affecting you is really having an effect on that ability for you to sleep. And so again, there are two types of dolphins out there. And so once we learn that, then it's all about, okay, how do we help these people sleep a little bit better? Now, one of the things about dolphins I can also tell you is they do have a tendency to have a little bit more anxiety than most of my other chronotypes. They're a lot like lions, so they like to get up early, they like to be performing, they like to be a COO, going down the list. But they have their vibration is just a little bit higher than most. They've got a little bit more going on, a few more things upset them, And I have found they're certainly more vulnerable to a lot of these autoimmune and inflammatory diseases. I can't put my finger on it. Like, I don't have enough research to be like, that's the gene. But I can tell you that when people take my quiz, the 10% that end up as dolphins, they're all extremely similar. And they fall into this category of this type of individual that we're talking about. So I think I'm one of the first people to actually address, number one, here are the sleep issues that we see in dolphins. And number two, here are some of the ways that you can think about being able to work through some of these issues and maybe get yourself out of the circumstance of being a dolphin and find your true chronotype.
Okay. So with those who have the genetic predisposition to be there, they would stay there, and they also might have a possibility of migrating from chronotype to chronotype.
Well, let's talk about that too, because here's the thing. Everybody migrates through all the chronotypes. Think about it. When you're a baby, you're a lion. You go to bed really early, you wake up really early, right? I mean, mom and dad have got to wake up with you, but you are pretty much the early bird of the household if you are an infant, right? Now move into toddler and kind of middle school, you're a bear, right? You're going to bed around 7:30, you're waking up around 7, like life is pretty good. Then adolescence hits. Oh, now you're a wolf. Right? I mean, every teenager out there, what do they want to do? They want to stay up late and they want to sleep late. They don't want to go to bed early and wake up early. So then what happens is you hit about 18, 20 years old, and then your chronotype seems to set for about 30 years. And then it starts to go backwards. So I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but if your parents are still alive or your grandparents are, and you call them up and you say, hey, grandma, grandpa, you want to go out for dinner? You know what they say? Great, I'll meet you at 4:30. Right? And you're like, grandma, who eats dinner at 4:30? What are you talking about? It's because their chronotypes are moving backwards. Their entire chronotypical time frame starts to shift backwards, and it's all based on melatonin. So to be clear, all of these things that we're talking about affect your core body temperature and your melatonin production. That's the mechanism that's going on here, and that's the thing that we're trying to keep a handle on. And we know there's this rhythm that it seems to follow.
Okay, that's very fascinating because right now I'm really diving into basal body temperature charting and seeing how people, the people who have disrupted sleep obviously are going to have lower or higher temperatures than the baseline. But I am seeing that too, that typically the clients that I serve, they're always trending on the low end and they have sleep disruption. They're waking up at 5 in the morning, as you mentioned earlier, like the dolphin types.
Yeah.
And they're also going to bed around, or they're trying to get to bed around 8 and 9, but not actually falling asleep.
Right, which is part of the problem. So many of my dolphins, this is a critical mistake that they all make. They go in bed early and they're thinking, hey, I had a crappy night last night. Maybe tonight will be better if I can just, and here's what happens is they're not taking into account their rhythm, right? So let's say that you're a wolf and you're exhausted, right? And you get in bed early, like at 7 o'clock, it's not gonna work, okay? Your body isn't ready to do that at that time. And so I tell people all the time, you're really setting yourself up for sleep from the moment that you wake up throughout the day. There's different things that you can do along the day to give you great success at night. One of the top tips that I give across all chronotypes, so not just the dolphins, but anyone, is wake up at the same time 7 days a week.
Agreed.
Let me explain the biology. So what's interesting about this is when you wake up in the morning and your eyes open up, sunlight hits your eye and sends a signal based on a cell in your eye called a melanopsin cell to turn off the melatonin faucet in your brain. But it sets a timer for approximately 14 hours later. So if you're waking up at, let's say, 6 a.m., 14 hours later is 8 o'clock, that's when melatonin starts, the process starts and you're doing good. Everything's going fine during the week, and then Saturday comes and you decide, I'm not waking up at 6, I'm going to wake up at 8, 2 hours later. And what ends up happening? Melatonin production is 2 hours later. This is not a movable curve. This is a static process. And so if you're consistent 7 days a week, then your melatonin is consistent 7 days a week at night. And for dolphins in particular, this is critical. Now, a lot of dolphins will tell me, Michael, look, I barely sleep during the week. I might get 5.5 hours. So I've got to catch up on the weekends. You've got to give me some give here, some area where I can do stuff. So there's 2 areas that I think you can do things. So number 1, on Saturdays, I'm okay if you sleep in for like 45 minutes, but that's it. Like that is your upper level limit, okay, is 45 minutes. And if you want to take a nap, I don't think I care if you take a nap, but you need to be careful about when and for how long. So most people who have erratic sleep schedules like dolphins probably should not nap at all. But if you absolutely have to nap, then what I would tell you is you want to nap around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and you don't want to nap for longer than about 25 minutes. Why? Because you're going to lower that sleep drive. Remember when we were talking before in the conversation about drive? Well, that's all biology. And when you fall asleep, you actually reduce the amount of adenosine. And so you don't have as much sleep drive that night. So for my dolphins out there, quick naps, we're talking 20, 25 minutes maximum if you absolutely positively have to have one. If you can avoid the napping though as a dolphin, it's probably a better idea. One of the other things that dolphins are really not good at is caffeine consumption. They're already pretty anxious people. When we start onboarding a lot of caffeine because they're exhausted, it just has a tendency to tailspin in the wrong direction. So another thing that I talk about with a lot of my dolphins is hydration versus caffeination. How does your body operate better when it's well hydrated versus not? And that's really where we come across some of the information in my new book, Sleep, Drink, Breathe, Wellness is Too Complicated, because wellness is too complicated. Like if people just maintained a level of hydration, understood how to deep breathe, and slept, on some form of a reasonable schedule, like almost everything gets into place. It's pretty miraculous, actually.
Yeah, and that is the pillar, like 3 of the pillars that we always focus on is the diet is in there too, but rest is so critical. And a lot of people think rest as just the number of hours they take in of sleep.
No.
So tell us, how do we best judge the quality of sleep that we're actually getting?
It's a great question. It's a great question. So there's really 2 ways I would argue. So number one, and I think this is, by the way, the most accurate, I think everybody in the room is their own best doctor. Okay. So when you wake up, how do you feel? Do you feel bright-eyed and bushy-tailed within, I don't know, a minute of waking up? Or do you feel like crap and wish you wanted to go to bed? If that's the case, if it's choice B and not choice A, you got a quality sleep problem, okay? Number 2 is if you sleep extended periods of time, like if you have to get 9, 10 hours of sleep, that's a huge red flag that there's a quality issue going on. Now, you could also track your sleep, right? I've got an Oura ring. People see me wearing that all the time. Like, what about that, Michael? Let's talk for a second about trackers in general, and then I'm happy to talk about the Oura. So trackers in general are not very good. To be clear, when I have you in a sleep laboratory, I have 27 electrodes all over your head and body. I'm getting a lot of really good data. To be clear, you're not getting a great night's sleep with 27 electrodes all over you, right? But the data that I'm getting is very accurate. So when all you have is a ring or a wrist strap or something like that, the data is not accurate. Now, when you look at the head-to-head studies versus sleep studies, what you can see is Oura and Fitbit are the 2 that seem to be very good at knowing when you fall asleep and when you wake up. They're the best at it, actually, but almost nobody after that does much else pretty good. A lot of people, they try to tell you what sleep stages that you have. So here's the problem, is I've got to get temperature data from my finger, then I have to track it to sleep staging, then I have to figure out, is this human at this temperature at this stage, and then I have to give it to you, and I have to do that every 30 seconds all across the night to be able to give you enough data. You can see how complicated this gets, right? This is not an AI solution problem, unfortunately. I wish it was, and there are some people that are moving in that direction. I would argue that 6 months to a year from now, we should see some highly accurate tracker data. But as of this moment, the tracker data is just not that good. When you get into the depths of sleep, like the stages, which is where you learn about the quality. What I generally tell people though is this, and I can't count the number of people, Sharon, who do this to me. They walk up to me, they're like, Dr. Breus, my Oura ring says I only got 14 minutes of deep sleep. Am I okay? Let me tell you something. I don't know if you're okay or not. But what I can tell you is, did your Oura ring say that you got 14 minutes the night before? Yes. And the night before? Yes. Then you're fine, because it's being consistently inaccurate. I want to know what happens when it goes from 14 minutes to 307 to 262. The delta is what I'm interested in. So number one, for people out there, don't fall in love with your tracker and look at the data every day. Okay? It doesn't do you any good. Once a week at the end, especially for dolphins, once a week at the end, because one of the things that can happen is there's something called orthosomnia. So this is a weird situation where people get so interested in their information that it becomes stressful when they receive it, and now they've got anxiety about their tracker information. So we want people to not spiral into all of this stuff. So as a general guideline, here's what I do. Is I have a paper, pencil, sleep diary that I give to my patients. And I say, look, in the morning when you wake up, answer these 5 or 7 questions. That's it. Just do that and let me know. And at the bottom of it, I ask, how did you feel this morning? How long did it take you to feel rested this morning? Those are the questions that I'm starting to look at. And then I'm looking at how many times do you wake up? What time do you go to bed? What time do you wake up? And then what is the consistency of that? To be fair, as a sleep specialist, that's all I do in session with people. Like, I don't get into aura data with them. Now, I've got plenty of patients who've got aura data. I actually have an open API so I can actually drill into people's rings all over the world and all that kind of good stuff. And they all get all interested, like, what's going on? And I'm like, you need to relax, okay? Like, again, too much information is not a good thing. Your body will adapt. You will figure these things out. Slow down, relax, don't worry so much. But if you wake up and you don't feel good, that's a quality problem, not a quantity problem.
Mm-hmm. Now, Michael, when you were talking about the anxiety provoking, like the ability to check your stats, there are so many people that have a hard time shifting from that sympathetic to the parasympathetic mode.
Oh yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's hear some of your tips on how people who have this anxiety response or even just ruminating thoughts, like what are some tips that they can quickly implement?
This is my favorite. This is my favorite. So I'm going to describe a situation to you that I think will encompass inside of a sleep example what you and I are talking about here. So the number one question that I get asked everywhere I go is, what do you do if you wake up between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning and you can't fall back to sleep? Okay. That is the number one question that I get asked. Okay. And it has a lot to do with anxiety. But there's also biology in there, so let me explain. Your core body temperature rises, and it gets to a peak at around 10:30 at night. Then it begins to fall. When it falls, that's a signal to your brain to release melatonin, which, remember, is that key that starts the engine for sleep. However, your core body temperature still drops. At some point in time, you have to heat your body up, otherwise you go hypothermic and you die, right? And so your body starts heating up. That usually occurs between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning. Every human on Earth, I want all the listeners to hear this, every human on Earth wakes up between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning. The difference is most people just roll over and go right back to sleep, and they don't even realize that they've woken up because you have to be up a full 60 seconds to even know that you are awake, okay? I'm talking to the dolphins out there and the people who have disrupted autonomic nervous systems, because this is your playground, right? Okay, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. Here we are again. How do I lower my anxiety and allow myself to get back to sleep? So there's one metric that's really, really important that almost nobody knows, and that's in order to enter into a state of unconsciousness, you need a heart rate of 60 or below, okay? So my goal is to help people lower their anxiety, lower their heart rate, and prevent what I call monkey mind. So in the middle of the night, people aren't thinking straight. And then they start to think, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired tomorrow because I didn't get enough sleep tonight, because I'm going to say something crazy, or my spouse is going to hate me because I'm going to do this, or my children, or whatever. And you start getting this crazy thinking, or you think, oh, well, I'm up. I might as well start thinking about what to do tomorrow. And then again, you're rolling. Here's where there's a very unique technique called 4-7-8 breathing. And I use this technique, and what it does is it turns on my parasympathetic and turns off my sympathetic. And that's really one of the hallmarks of what I do. And it prevents me from thinking all at the same time. Let me explain. So 4-7-8 breathing was not developed by me. It was developed by a guy named Dr. Andrew Weil, Harvard-trained naturalist doctor, kind of one of the first in this whole holistic space, super bright guy. He was working for the Navy SEALs, and they were working with the snipers. And so if you're a sniper and you're shooting downrange, if your heart is beating too fast, you can actually change the trajectory of the bullet, right? And when you're shooting a mile down way, you move a millimeter and it could be 100 yards in a different direction. Mm-hmm. So they had to teach the soldiers how to shoot in between heartbeats. And in order to do that, what they did was they lowered their heart rate to 60 or below using this technique. Now, I don't really care about downrange snipers and all that nonsense, but I do care about going your heart rate below 60, and this technique seems to do it. So what people do is you slowly breathe in for a count of 4, you hold for a count of 7, and then you breathe out for a count of 8. Now, let me explain why this turns out to be so important. Most people, as I've learned in the development of this new book, are shallow breathers. They don't use their whole lung. They actually only use about half of their lung. And what happens is our bodies were built so that if you extend your lung, by the way, your lungs are not the same size. I know it looks like they're the same size, but one lung has 2 lobes and the other has 3. So you actually have very different structures in your body. And our body was meant to fully extend the lung because that is the amount of air that is required to fuel the rest of your body. So if you're only breathing with half of your lung, as in shallow breathing, your body is either got one of 2 problems. It's either only going to get half the air that it needs, which means it's going to die, or your heart has to increase to move the oxygen around faster. And so this is where there is a big difference between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So when your heart is having to beat faster, it's all sympathetic, right? But if we can get the parasympathetic going, that's when we start to see sleep. And so by doing the 4-7-8 breathing, here's what ends up happening. When you breathe in slowly for a count of 4, you're actually breathing in much deeper than you normally are. And so you actually fill the lung. Now, when you hold it for a beat of 7, you give yourself the time to use up the oxygen that's in the system. Now, when you breathe out through your mouth, by the way, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slowly breathe out for 8. You now dump all that excess carbon dioxide. And when you breathe in, you're fully extending the lung and the heart rate starts to go down because it's not beating twice as fast because you're using the whole lung. And so all of a sudden, this mechanism clicks on the parasympathetic. And so as your heart rate starts to go down because you've got more oxygen moving through the system, parasympathetic pops on, and this has a whole host of benefits because it's called the rest and digest system. And this is where everything starts to slow down, everybody starts to feel sleepy, and your system is actually going into recovery. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And the nerdy part of me wants to ask, is there a respiration rate that is optimal if you're in sleep? Do you know, like numerically, what would we be aiming for?
So generally speaking, when we look at respiration during sleep, we're looking at something like, 16, 17, 18 breaths per minute, like somewhere around there. So it's like a nice 5-second in and out. That's kind of a nice like tempo for breathing, kind of what we look like. Now, when we bring up breathing in sleep, we can't have a discussion without talking about sleep apnea, right? So remember, sleep apnea is a situation where people stop breathing in their sleep. Very dangerous, something you definitely want to get looked at. And for folks out there who are battling with this idea of sympathetic, parasympathetic, when you hold your breath, you immediately go into sympathetic. There's almost no way that you can be in parasympathetic because you're just not putting oxygen in the system. So for folks out there who may have something going on with their sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system, if you even suspect that you have sleep apnea, please go get it checked. Worst case scenario, you don't have it. There's nothing to do. Best case scenario, you have it, we fix it, and now this dysregulation that was going on in your autonomic nervous system because of this apnea is now gone and treated. So there's a lot of different things how sleep connects to the autonomic nervous system.
Yeah, and now you're triggering another thought process in me. But when people have the sleep apnea, they're extensively snoring. And I actually have this situation happening in my household with my husband, and I have a young child. He's 8 years old, but I noticed he's teeth grinding, he's snoring a little bit, he's waking up multiple times. And we've been working on things holistically, like in terms of cleaning up the diet, making sure the sleep hygiene is on point, going to sleep consistently, waking up, grounding first morning, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I
But
love
it's
that
not
stuff.
getting us there all the way.
Yeah,
So
you need a sleep study and both of them.
yeah. And then what are your opinions on sleep apparatuses besides the sleep apnea machines or the CPAPs? Like what are other things that can be approached?
Absolutely. So let's break down sleep apnea. First, I want to address the situation with your son and your husband first, right? So number one, super common. Like I hear this all the time. And don't forget, genetics run through the family, right? And so if he has craniofacial situation that's causing his snoring, then it's very interesting and likely that your son has a similar facial structure in terms of their sinuses, oral cavity, things of that nature. So that is number one, something to look at. Number two, kids shouldn't snore. Just as a general rule, kids should not snore. Now, one thing I always look at with kids is allergies and particulates in the air and things like that, especially if you notice that the snoring happens seasonally. That's usually a big indicator that it's something that's in the nose. What I'll do with my kids who are snorers to try to identify where the snoring is we might use like an Afrin for one night to just in each side of the nostril to just really zap those tissues so that they shrink. And then we can see, okay, can they breathe? Do they still snore? If they do, then we know we have a structural issue like deviated septum, large turbinates, tonsils, things of that nature, where then there are other decisions that we might want to make along the road, but we want to kind of understand that. Then the second thing to consider is, okay, let's say your husband and your son do have mild sleep apnea. What do you do about it? What are kind of the thought processes there? Now, I want to be super duper clear. There are a lot of ways to treat sleep apnea. The number one way is this machine called a CPAP machine, which stands for continuous positive airway pressure. So basically, it's a hair dryer blowing up your nose all night long. Okay. Now, Michael, why would I want a hair dryer blowing up my nose? Well, people with sleep apnea, what happens is their throats collapse in the middle of the night and they can't breathe. And so with a mask and an air compressor, a thin stream of air goes through the mask, goes down your throat, and then ever so slightly opens that area up and feeds air to your lungs. I get it. This seems very draconian, right? It seems like, I mean, come on, we've got to figure out a better way to do this than blowing air up somebody's nose all night long. Here's what's interesting. CPAP works 99% of the time. There's actually no other treatment in all of medicine that works as well as CPAP. But who wants to sleep with the mask on their face all night long? It's not particularly sexy. It can be extremely uncomfortable, but it does work. So, Michael, are there any other options? Yes, there are. Number one, weight loss, especially for men. Not as much for women with sleep apnea, but especially for men. Men have a tendency to put on weight through their necks, and that is, again, an area that gets crushed in the middle of the night. So weight loss can certainly be helpful. But to be clear, sleep apnea is not just a big person's disease. But a 5-pound weight loss can usually drop decibel level for snoring by about 25, which is huge. So in a 200-pound person, if they lose 10 pounds, they're a lot more tolerable to sleep next to. They're still going to snore, but it's not going to be nearly as loud. Other than the CPAP machine, there are dental devices that people can use that are actually quite effective. Now, they're different than like a night guard. So you'll see a lot of people have got night guards because they grind their teeth. I think you mentioned your son grinds his teeth. When that happens, that is merely a guard to keep your teeth from shearing across each other. That is not what I'm talking about. A sleep apnea mouth guard is very different. This is an upper and a lower, and they're connected. And the lower comes forward just about a millimeter or two and brings your mandible, the entire back part of your jaw forward, thereby opening up your posterior airway space and allowing you to breathe. So this is a mechanical maneuvering. So CPAP is a forced air opening of the throat. An oral appliance is actually a mechanical maneuvering where we actually open up the pipe a little bit more on a temporary basis because you pop it out in the morning, you throw it in a tray and clean it, and then you go about your day. Now, the third area is surgery. Now, the two other things I've been talking about, CPAP and oral appliances, I would consider those to be more treatments than cures because you're going to be on those for quite a while. Do I get people off of CPAP? Yes. Do I get people off of oral appliances? Sure. What usually has to happen? A lot of weight loss, sometimes a surgical intervention. It just sort of depends. If you had really mild apnea to begin with, a lot of times I can get you off with just a 25-pound weight loss, but there's differences that kind of go along the way. From a surgical perspective, there are at least 6 different surgeries based on what anatomy is kind of in the way, if you will. There is something new that I think is kind of interesting. It's called Inspire. So this is a little, it's about a 50-cent piece, like a 50-cent piece, that size, and it's a battery that goes underneath your clavicle. And then 2 wires go up your neck on the inside, not the outside, where one hits the vagus nerve and the other hits the back of your tongue. And then every time your tongue moves back a millimeter or two, it sends a shock to it and it pushes your tongue forward. Now, to be clear, you can't feel it. It doesn't change your voice or your taste buds or anything like that. But it is surgically implanted. And so there's a remote control. So you put the remote over it, you push a button, it turns it on. Go to sleep. When you wake up, you grab the remote control, turn it off, right? Because you wouldn't want to have it on during the daytime. The only other thing that I don't like about it is about every 10 years, you have to change the battery, which is surgical. So that doesn't just happen. Like somebody's got to cut you open, pull it out, reattach, do the whole thing. It doesn't take that long to do it, and these surgeries are not particularly complicated. So they seem to be doing better and better. Historically, we didn't think we could use Inspires in really big people like obese people and super obese people, but now we've discovered new technology to be able to do that. So just about anybody can benefit from this Inspire technology. But it's not the only one. There are a whole host of different surgical interventions that can actually clear out this kind of whole area, everything from stuff that you do in your neck, to your jaw, to your nose, to the back of your mouth, things of that nature. There's also one other thing, which is called Excite OSA, which is a device that you wear on your tongue, and it vibrates on your tongue during the day for about 20 minutes, and it actually shrinks your tongue. So again, it provides more room inside the oral cavity. It doesn't shrink it by much, and it doesn't change taste or voice or anything like that. That's brand new on the market, been out about a year.
Okay, yeah, I've never heard of that one. I have heard of the airway mouth specialist that they develop these apparatus that I'm not sure if they use them just during sleeping or all throughout the day,
Yeah,
but it's to
just during sleep
essentially
usually.
like expanding the mouth and
Now that's a little bit different. So for dentists, I will tell you this, especially in pediatrics, it sounds like you're describing a palate expander, right? Which goes in the top of the mouth and opens that way. That's different than an oral appliance. Oral appliance is removable, but in kids, to be honest, I love palate expanders. If we could, honestly, between you and me, if we could stick a palate expander in every single child that was born, in all seriousness, we'd completely obliterate sleep apnea. We'd never see another case of it again, ever.
Wow,
it's amazing.
yeah.
Because here's what happens is kids are thumb suckers, right? And they push on the top of and what it does is it actually brings the entire apex of the roof of the mouth higher, because they're pushing on it the whole time, right? When they're sucking their thumb or when they're on a nipple or on a bottle or things like that. And what's happening is our heads are getting leaner and taller, and that's changing our anatomy. And what's happening is the top of our mouth is going into our sinuses and making them very, very small. And that's when a little bit of particulate gets in there or something, inflames it, you got apnea.
Yeah. And to be respectful of your time, I just wanted to touch upon any other biohacks that you might be recommending. I know in our case, we use many things like red light therapy, infrared sauna. We also have a device, BrainTap. Are you familiar with BrainTap?
I'm very familiar with BrainTap. I was on their board for a while. I love BrainTap.
Yes.
Here's what I'll tell you is you got to get the basics right first. And I think that's where my new book, Sleep, Drink, Breathe, comes in. And so what I tell people all the time is if you're not doing the fundamentals correct, the biohacks don't really do you a whole lot of good. Like I look at biohacking as like the extra 2% of whatever it is I'm trying to accomplish. That'll get me maybe 1 or 2% further. But the 98% is about consistency, is about good habits, is about good quality, all of those other things. And so when I look to biohacks for sleep, I always have to stop and tell people, hold on a second. Like there's some basics in sleep that are not biohacks that you just need to learn and understand. So number 1, wake up at the same time every single day. I promise you, it will do you some good. Number 2, get enough sleep, okay? 5 hours is not enough sleep. In most people, 6 hours is not enough sleep. There are people who survive just fine on 6.5, but for the majority of people, especially people listening to this podcast who have got an autoimmune issue or an autonomic nervous system issue, you need more sleep, okay? You need more than 5 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep. Now you're saying to me, Michael, I know, I wish I could get it. I'm trying, right? So that's where the consistency really starts to come into play. And in the book, we also talk about how hydration is such a key critical factor. Also, to just general autonomic nervous system function, if you ain't hydrated, that system is going down fast. So you really have to make sure that your hydration levels are good. And we really talk about it in the book. I give people a very simple way to look at this. And so like once you know your chronotype, I tell you what time to go to bed, what time to wake up. And then once you understand what your water intake needs to be, when it needs to be, and how much you need to do, then you're good to go there. And then it's just a few breathing techniques. And honestly, you're like on your road to wellness.
Yeah, and I love how you laid that out, and you allow people to make it a consistent part of their life in a more, I guess, easily attainable fashion. I guess that's what I want to say, because a lot of people are dissuaded from bringing on something, especially what you said with going to bed early every day or waking up at the same time every day. So I have so many people that are like, oh, but the weekends, I'm gonna now limit them to 45 minutes.
There you go. Exactly. And here's the thing it's remember, sleep is flexible. Okay. Like everybody, like your brain is really good at knowing exactly how much sleep you need. That doesn't mean you always get it, but your brain knows what to do. Right. And so when you do fall asleep, so let's say you're, oh my gosh, I didn't fall asleep until 1 o'clock in the morning and I had to get up at 6:30. I only got 5.5 hours of sleep. Okay. Your brain knows exactly what happened. And so the next night, your brain has been preparing all day for that. So you getting in bed early doesn't work because your brain is not expecting that. Getting in bed at your normal bedtime, this is, by the way, one of the biggest hacks that I've ever seen, is when people are tired, they go to bed early, which is a terrible idea, right? So again, going to bed at your normal bedtime, even after you've had a bad night, doesn't sound like much of a biohack, but what it does is it keeps your circadian rhythms consistent. And here's the best biohack of them all, is if you have consistent sleep, having a bad night doesn't hurt nearly as much, and your body snaps back right after it. So if I said one word, it's consistency. Just have a level of consistency with your wake up time and with your total sleep. You'll be shocked at how it affects so many other areas of your life.
Awesome. So I appreciate you sharing that with me and with our audience. And again, what was the name of your most recent book?
My most recent book is called Sleep, Drink, Breathe. Wellness is Too Complicated. It's available on Amazon. Swing on over to my website, The Sleep Doctor. We've got it there as well.
Very good. I was just going to ask, how else can they find you?
Yep. So my handle is The Sleep Doctor on all social media. So you can find me there on Facebook, Twitter, X, TikTok, you name it. We're putting out content and teaching people how to sleep.
Fantastic. So we'll make sure that's included in our show notes. And once again, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us. It's been so informative and just a wealth of information here.
You're super duper kind. Thank you. And I love talking with new audiences like this who can start to understand the power of sleep. This is a great group of people who I think understand if you just do a few simple things, you will see huge results.
Absolutely. And thanks again. And thank you to all our listeners. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.
Sweet dreams.